Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the masterclass, Navigating Through the Heart. I'm going to introduce you to the spiritual path of Venus. My name is Ingrid Arboin. I'm an astrologer. My focus is on establishing humanity in the new era, or the age of Aquarius. Navigating through the age of Aquarius will bring us into a new age, and I consider that an age where the scientific and the spiritual worlds come together. They were really disconnected in the age of Pisces, but we have this opportunity to reconnect them. So astrology with astronomy, alchemy with chemistry, physics with magic, and they all rejoin. And so this is ancient knowledge that is kind of coming back to us over that was sort of lost over the last 2,000 years, and we're given an opportunity to modernize it, bring it back, modernize it, and make it applicable to the age of Aquarius. And so that's what we're going to do. And the whole goal is to raise our personal consciousness so that we can raise the consciousness of the collective. So for my part, I've reconnected astrology with astronomy, and this is allowing us to re-access the ancient knowledge of the spiritual path through the 7 spheres. And this is a path that reconnects us to harmony, and it reconnects us to resonance with our emotions, emotional resonance. And there is an actual cyclical nature to that makes it true. Okay, so we have a very important Venus retrograde coming up next month, in the month of March. Venus retrogrades are infamous for relationship breakups, spending too much money, wasting money. It really tests our moral fabric or our integrity. And sometimes exes reappear during this period, and we get all excited that it's finally going to work out. And hint, they usually do not, with one exception if you have Venus retrograde in your natal chart. So this masterclass, if it's caught your attention, it's probably because you already are feeling it. You might have some personal planets in your chart that are being aspected. We are in the shadow phase. We go into Venus retrograde on March 2nd, and that period is really taking us into the underworld with an opportunity to do some deep spiritual work. Because the goal of a Venus retrograde is to go through that period into the underworld, or into our unconscious, in other words, and to come out the other side illuminated, and to rise as a morning star, as they say, illuminated, either as the priestess or the empress. And those are 2 different energies, and we'll talk a little bit more about them in the video. I'll get into the difference between them. So how do we use this energy, this Venus retrograde? It's 40 days approximately. How do we use it for spiritual growth? How do we come to the other side of it illuminated and into our true power as an empress or as a priestess? How do we do that? So I'm going to answer that question, but I want to start off with telling you 2 stories. One where Venus retrograde went horribly wrong for me, and the second was how I discovered the spiritual path of Venus in the south of France, and how I came to the other side of it, illuminated and able to bring you this information and these tools, this path. So one is a fail, one is a success. So this is my horribly wrong story. It's a bit embarrassing. It was the day before Venus was about to go retrograde. So it was going retrograde at 29 degrees of Leo, which is where my sun is. My sun is at 28, 27, 28 degrees of Leo. And I also have a Jupiter at 0 degrees of Scorpio. So the Jupiter and Sun in my chart are sextile, and this is a really nice combination, very optimistic. So without a Venus retrograde, Venus coming to those points in my chart would be really nice. They would bring in a nice benefic energy. Relationships can come up, nice vacations can happen, so on. But with the retrograde, it's a different story. So at my friend's cottage for the weekend, and we were staying across the lake from a friend of hers who was having a party. So we decided to all go. And there I met this really nice guy. We hung out for the night. We played pool. We did various things. And at the end of the night, he gave us a ride home. And getting a ride home on a cottage is getting into a pontoon boat and going across the lake. So that's what we did. But when we got to the shore, my friends jumped off the boat, and one of them had the rope, and she threw it back on the boat and pushed the boat back out. So there I was with this guy in the middle of the lake, just me and him. And I'm going to call him Scott. Scott leaned over and he kissed me. And so that was exciting. The next day, Venus went retrograde. And remember, it's on my Sun and sextile my Jupiter, and Jupiter is in Scorpio, very sexy Scorpio. And the same guys invited us over again to hang out. So we went, we sat around, played some games, and we played a drinking game, which was probably my first mistake. But I was at a cottage and didn't have to drive and had nowhere to go. What could go wrong? So Scott sat down beside me and he subtly grabbed my hand. But across, and we were sitting around a table. Across the table were 4 of his friends, and they all saw this subtle move, and I saw them all kind of do a double take, and I could see it in their eyes. They had competition. So the competition was on, and the next thing I knew, they were all trying to get my attention. I was the center of attention all night. And of course, this never happens to me. So it went straight to my head. And I got to say, I did some things that I normally would not do. Again, with some alcohol in the picture, that was not a smooth move for me. Long story short, I messed things up. At the end of the night, Scott did take me home and we did make out. But in the middle of it, he said something to me. He said, "I didn't realize you were a party girl," which I'm not. And I immediately tried to defend myself, but my actions kind of spoke differently about that. And so he said, I'm not judging you. I'm not judging you. It's okay. But I knew it had switched something in his head. Like I was put in a different category. And so I spent the rest of the Venus retrograde trying to convince him that I was not a party girl and that I was worthy of his attention and worthy of something more with him. So basically, Venus retrograde fail. Now, I want to tell you my second story, which was a much more conscious intention. My second story was set up with a conscious intention. But my second story starts in the south of France. And before I get into that story, I want to share with you a video because this video, it's right in the area that I was, and it really encompasses and embraces all of the things that I want to talk to you about after I tell you the story about the Venus retrograde and the Venus cycle.
Hidden knowledge, the symbols of air, fire, water, earth, the 4 elements of alchemy. Alchemy, For most people today, no more than a half-forgotten medieval quest for a way to change base metal into pure gold. But the true alchemist's search was much more than that. A key phrase in their writings is, as above, so below, reflecting their continual search for an earthly counterpart to the immensity of God's cosmos, their desire to transmute base man into pure spirit. The alchemical quest seems to have held much fascination for many of the Grand Masters of the Priory of Zion, and the Templars seem to have absorbed it along with the other Eastern philosophies and sciences with which they came into contact. As above, so below. Base man into pure spirit, a religious concept. And the Templars were a religious organization, the Priory also. And Saunier the priest emphasized the religious aspect by placing cryptic imagery in his church, a church dedicated centuries before his time to Mary Magdalene, the redeemed sinner who was the first to see Christ after the resurrection. When Saunier returned from Paris with his newfound knowledge, he emphasized the importance of Mary Magdalene by naming the tower which he built with his newfound wealth, La Tour Magdala, the Magdala Tower. For the occult initiates of the Middle Ages, Mary Magdalene, through her redemption from sin and her unique knowledge of the risen Christ, was regarded as a medium of secret revelation, and those initiates had chosen the planet Venus as her symbol in the cosmos. A saint and a star. The connection between them could only be fanciful, subjective, close to fairy tale. I could find no connection that seemed valid to me until I realized that I had to stop imposing modern attitudes on the thinking of those involved in this mystery. To come to terms with it, to begin to understand, I had to look at their beliefs, their interpretations, in their way and not in ours. If we are to find a significance in Venus, then we must look at the planet as they did. And in the thinking of those who created this mystery, there was some connection between the pentacle at Rennes-le-Château, Mary Magdalene, and Venus. But how did the medieval mind view the universe? As soon as I began to work along those lines, I found exciting new answers to old questions stemming from the ancient belief that the Earth, and not the Sun, was the center of the universe. Each planet has its own pattern of movement around the Sun when seen from the Earth, and for medieval astrologers, those differing movements allowed them to draw geometric shapes based on the positions of the planets when they are aligned with the Sun. For example, Mercury in its orbit is aligned 3 times with the Sun, and the pattern formed by these conjunctions is an irregular triangle. Each planet makes a different number of alignments, each forms its own irregular pattern. Only one planet forms a precise and regular geometric pattern in the sky, and that planet is Venus, the heavenly representation of the earthly Mary Magdalene. And the pattern she draws, as regularly as clockwork every 8 years, is a pentacle. As above, so below. At Rennes-le-Château, village of Mary Magdalene, we have the perfect pentacle, the earthly counterpart of the perfect pentacle in the heavens, the secret and hidden pattern of Venus, the Magdalene. Each pentacle precise, known, yet hidden. One must be initiated into the mystery before one can see the age-old and unchanging truth that the heavens find reflected in that tiny location on the face of the earth. Here was the link between the worlds of matter and spirit, between base and corrupt man here on earth and the twinkling firmament where dwelt God and all his saints. Mary Magdalene, the medium of a secret revelation, was herself the image of the secret revelation in the sky. To the medieval mind, to the alchemist, to the Templar, to the Priory of Zion, such an image was immensely powerful, immensely potent. In that majestic symbol in the sky, harmonious, unchanging, regular as a metronome, was the music of the spheres.
So there are a number of things in that video that we will touch on. He tells you about what the medievalists had in mind when they set out the pentagram in that area. But you're kind of left with the feeling that you have to become a Knights Templar in order to be initiated and to benefit from this information. And that's not the case. So here we're going to talk about the pentagram and its connection to Venus, the planetary spheres that he mentioned and how they play into the Venus retrograde, and the cosmological model he was using, I also use, and I want to share with you how that is informed, how we move through the planetary spheres. Okay, so let me tell you about the second trip. The second trip was much different. And in the second trip, I intentionally went to the south of France to go into that pentagram energy, into the Mary Magdalene path, and to set intentions with that energy. And so we started our trip in July, at the beginning of July, and we ended it on Mary Magdalene Day, which was the 23rd. We were all leaving, but our last day together was Mary Magdalene Day, the 22nd of July. And it also happened to be the day that Venus was going retrograde. So really into that energy, really into the descent part of the path. This is when Venus was in her shadow, and we are right now in the shadow of Venus. We're starting to feel what it might be all about, what kinds of energies might be coming up, what kinds of topics might be coming up, although some of them might be complete surprises when we go into the actual Venus retrograde. So there we started in Spain. We went to Montserrat, and Montserrat, the abbey there, has a Venus. It's a cave. It's a cave that has a Black Madonna, and that cave used to be a Venus temple. So all across Spain, Europe, Spain, France, England are all of these temples that were dedicated to the planets. Those were Roman, before that Celtic, before that so on and so forth. So anyways, we're there, we go on a hike, we decide to hike just outside of the Abbey to a place called the Dragon's Eye. It's called the Dragon's Eye. And we hiked up there, we ended up staying there all night. But on the hike up to the Dragon's Eye, I was there and I was looking up and I could see Venus. Venus was really bright on her way down. She gets really close to Earth and quite bright. And I, it's so nice to look at Venus because you can really start to feel the energy, and it was amazing. But anyways, we then went into France, into that pentagram, in the landscape. And there we started at one of the points, which was Rennes-les-Bains, and we hiked to Rennes-le-Château. And in Rennes-les-Bains, there's a place where there's a chair. It's called the Devil's Chair or the Isis Chair. I like the Isis Chair better. It's a better term. And then there's also a red spring. And the red spring has iron in it. It's actually reddish, and it is connected to the masculine energy. And there is a masculine Mars rose path. I will be doing a series on the Mars rose path, very important path that you might have seen other workshops around Venus and the Venus path, but I have not seen anybody do anything around the Mars path. And that's really something that I will be bringing out in my book and also in a workshop coming up, because we do have a very important planetary conjunction coming up next year. Anyways, this trip, we set the intentions, and I knew that the Mars energy wasn't for me at this particular time, although my intention was actually around integrating masculine and feminine energy for myself and for the world. And what's happened is we've kind of overdone the masculine energy. And so I got clear guidance that I needed to stay for now in the feminine energy. And as I walked the path, I did that. I picked rosemary. I saw some juniper. I picked juniper. I was kind of walking a little bit slow for everybody else, but I was in my, I was in my groove, and we walked, and I really contemplated what I needed to, get from the trip, and what I needed to be, with the spaces that I needed to be. And some things that were coming up for me were, places where I needed to say yes and no, how I would be able to stay in that feminine energy that I was being called to stay in. I was being called to really look at my anger, because actually I had too much masculine energy, and anger was very, very present for me in that trip. And so that whole walk, that whole process gave me information about how to process, how to be in the Venus, the Venusian energy, and to go through those gates. So we ended the trip, and like I said, the Venus retrograde started on the last day. I then went to England, and I had messaged a guy that I knew about the fact that I was going to be in England, and I didn't hear from him. I didn't think I would hear from him, and lo and behold, all of a sudden I get a message that he's going to come. And so I was like, oh, okay, this is fun. But he could only make it halfway through my time there. And so he started asking of me things. Can you extend your trip? Now, this is where the yes and no's had to come in. I had to say no. Do you want to come and stay with me at my Airbnb? Yes. All of these kinds of things came up. And I allowed myself to be in a very feminine place, but with a strength about me that I could really tap into what was going on in my unconscious. Now, I had one test, and this is a very tricky one for me, where I slipped up. And basically what happened was, I do have a friend who lives in Glastonbury. She was allowing me to do laundry at her house. So I was walking with my laundry bag and the guy I was hanging out with, and we were walking, and we were actually going to go and have a coffee. I was going to drop off my laundry and meet him at the coffee shop. And as we were walking, we were daydreaming about living in Glastonbury and so on and so forth. And he said to me, because I'm actually a British citizen, so it's easy for me to live in England, but he said to me, we should just get married. And I had this weird feeling just go through my body, and I went unconscious. I went to my friend's house, I put the laundry in, and then I lied down on the couch and I fell asleep. And I never met up with him at the coffee shop. And then later on, I saw him, and he was a little bent out of shape, and I was thinking, what's up with him? nowhere in my conscious did I even think about what had just happened. And I think I asked him, and as a guide, oh, nothing, I'm fine, whatever. And then later on, he slipped it into conversation. Oh, well, that happened at the coffee shop when you didn't meet up with me. And I went, oh my God, I completely stood him up. And I had to go, why did I do that? What was going on? And in that process, I had disconnected from what he had said on the way there to how I had behaved. And I had to reconstruct it and go deep into my unconscious and find out what that was all about. And then I had to, it wasn't a big mess up, partly because when something happened, I became conscious that something was happening and went into a process. 8 years ago, and it was 8 years ago, it was at the beginning, the entire thing happened. The first incident happened 8 years before the second. So a whole rose cycle, which we'll talk about in a minute. So the, first time I was completely unconscious. I just went about, doing my thing until it really bit me in the butt. But this time I was like, whoa, wait a second. And I got really in process with it and came out of the other side illuminated. And now that relationship didn't develop into anything more. And I don't think it was meant to. I think it was there to bring me information. And so it did. And so this is the point of the Venus retrograde, to become illuminated. Now, one thing about illumination, sometimes things will come up. I mentioned that I knew during the part in France that there was some masculine things coming up, and I knew that I needed to stay away from the masculine energy. So this is part of being conscious in the unconscious. I went back the year after in 2024, and I did the masculine thing, the masculine rose path. And so my point in telling you that is sometimes things will come up that we're not ready for yet. And the process is a process that we're always going through. It's like an onion peeling. So, this is not something that you have to tackle everything all at once. And if you're in the process and if you're bringing consciousness to the process, you will know what things to not touch and what things are for you to deal with right now. And so, by the way, both of those retrogrades were 8 years apart. The first one was 8 years before the second one. They were both in Leo. So a whole rose cycle happened between those two events. So let's go into the Venus cycle. So this is Venus's cycle, her spiritual path. And you can see that Venus goes around the sun, and I'm going to talk about Venus going around the sun in a minute when I talk about the Tychos model. But I've also overlaid it as she goes through the signs, and I'm going to talk about that also in a minute. But just to look at the cycle in general, she starts out at inferior conjunction. This would be in the underworld. This is when Venus is retrograde, and she is closest to Earth, between Earth and the sun. And then when she emerges, she comes into being a morning star. So she's a morning star for 9 months. And then she comes to superior conjunction. And actually, at superior conjunction, Venus does go become invisible behind the sun, but it's not retrograde. It's just invisible. And when she conjuncts the sun at superior conjunction, she then comes out and is an evening star. And so it's in the evening star phase where we see the descent of Inanna, the descent of Venus. And I'm going to talk about Inanna in a minute. So then she spends 9 months again, and she goes all the way around and comes back to the retrograde where she's in the underworld and she's closest to Earth. So retrogrades always happen when Venus is closest to the Earth, between the Earth and the Sun. And in the entire cycle, Venus conjuncts with the Sun twice, at the inferior conjunction and at the superior conjunction. And the entire cycle is 18 months, 9 months as a morning star, 9 months as an evening star. Now, as Venus goes through into the underworld, she goes through the 7 spheres. And the 7 spheres are, or the gates or ladders, 7 is the number that shows up across all cultures throughout time, from Sumeria to the Gnostics. And this path, however, did disappear during Christianity. But it was, part of a Gnostic tradition, Christian tradition with the Cathars, and it was part of pilgrimages that disappeared or that were converted into Catholic pilgrimages, and so that's why there are Venus temples and Jupiter temples and so on, and those are the Roman versions. There was also Celtic versions, many, and there was, versions that happened in Egypt along the Nile, along the Camino in Spain, in France, and in the UK. So those were all connected to the path of the spheres and the Milky Way. But we'll get to the Milky Way in the actual program that I'm going to be doing, which I will tell you about at the end. So the pilgrimage is something you definitely should consider doing, but you don't need to do a pilgrimage to do this work. You can work with the cosmic energy, but definitely if you combine cosmic and telluric, the energy of the land, it's powerful, very powerful for spiritual transformation and spiritual growth. And so that's what I was doing, and the example that I was sharing with you, but it's not something that you need to do this work. And I will be doing this work in a workshop coming up, obviously online, so we won't be on the land. But Venus is represented in mythology across time and cultures. She is Inanna, she is Ishtar, she is Isis, she is Hathor, she's Aphrodite, she's Freya. And in the Christian esoteric tradition, she is Mary Magdalene. And in the book Hamlet's Mill, they say that all myths are cosmological, and they describe the planets and the stars and their paths. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the Sumerian myth, because it is one that is so clear and it's so easy to follow. And I'm going to describe Venus's descent into the underworld as she moves from superior conjunction to inferior conjunction. So let's go back to that chart. So Inanna is queen of heaven and earth, and she is there in her palace, really enjoying life, has a husband, has children, life is good. And her sister is in need of her. And so she decides, and her sister is a Reshkagal. She is queen of the underworld. And so Inanna decides that she's going to descend into the underworld to see her sister. But before she goes, she instructs her attendant, Nishshubar, to seek help if she does not return. And so she goes. She passes through the 7 gates of the underworld. And in each of those gates, she's stripped of a garment and divine power. And by the time she gets to the 7th gate, she is naked and powerless in front of Ereshkigal, her sister. And then Ereshkigal orders her execution, and Inanna is turned into a corpse. And after 3 days and 3 nights, Nebuchadnezzar, I can never say the name, but this other god, he goes and he doesn't hear from her, so he goes and he seeks help from the gods. And Enki, the god of wisdom, sends 2 beings to revive Inanna, one with water and one with food, water of life and food. And so she is resurrected, and she can leave the underworld, but she must find a substitute to take her place in the underworld. And so she decides that her substitute should be Dumuzi, which was her husband, who apparently had not mourned her absence. So it's important to note that Inanna goes through 7 gates. Those are the 7 planetary spheres, and she's required to give something up at each of the gates. And also note that she spent 3 days and 3 nights there, which is about the length of time that we don't see Venus when she goes into the underworld. Retrograde is around 40 days, but Venus, when she disappears during a retrograde, it's about 3, can be as long as 7 days. And that really is dependent on how close Venus is to Earth and where you are in terms of latitude on the Earth. So I guess the 3 days and 3 nights would be the average. Okay, so what I will say is where Inanna starts her descent is giving us clues on how to approach our descent into the unconscious. So let's look at the model again. Actually, before we look at the model, let me just go through what she has to give up as she goes through the 7 gates. So the first thing that she needs to give up is her crown. And they say that this symbolizes her divine authority. And I see the crown as, her crown as the moon. And so I will show you here. So at superior conjunction, there she is, the moon around her head, and she is, that is her crown. Her crown is her emotions, the moon, and that's where she starts. She starts in Cancer. And in Cancer, it should be noted that Venus is exalted in Cancer. And this start is also in line with the Thema Mundi, which is the Greek order of the planets. So at the moon, she starts, she releases her crown. And then she has to give up her lapis lazuli earrings. And this represents her wealth and her status. So lapis lazuli earrings, her wealth and status, Leo, that's the sun, and that's her regalness, her wealth and her status. And then she has to give up her beaded necklace, which is, this is Virgo, it's connected to Mercury, and they say that that's a sign of her adornment and her beauty. And then she has to give up her beaded breastplate. So she has a beaded breastplate that goes across her chest. And this is this is connected to Libra. And I really struggled with this order, and I thought, well, wouldn't it be her beauty be connected to Venus? But really the heart is connected to our love. So this is really making sense to me in terms of next, her beads that go across her heart, her love, her protection, her strength, which does come from her heart, from her love. And then she has to give up her ring of power, her bracelet. And that is Scorpio, the bracelet, and Scorpio is connected with power. And then she goes into the 6th sphere, and this is her royal robe she needs to give up, representing her wisdom and sovereignty. And yes, wisdom is connected with Sagittarius. So there she goes through that gate, and then she ends up at the last gate, and she is naked. And so that is giving up all of her clothes, and that's Capricorn. So Capricorn, that's where the lessons are, is connected to Saturn. That's where the lessons are. And so she is there in the underworld, completely naked, and that is the order. Now, this really does speak to the order. The first sphere, we connect with our emotions. And so what we're going to do actually in the workshop that I have coming up is only go through 3 gates because it's quite a bit of information. And there's some astrological alignments that are happening that will allow us to access that information. And the first is Venus connected with the moon on the 1st of March, which is the day it starts. And so we'll be able to connect with the energy of the moon, do some processes around the moon and the lunar energy. And then as we go along in that retrograde cycle, Venus is going to connect with Mercury. And so I'm going to, one of the reasons I'm not going to do the whole thing is all 7 spheres is because it's very rare. Well, not rare, but it's not always the case that Venus and Mercury will go retrograde together and be in the underworld together. And so this is where I want to talk about Venus as the priestess and Venus as the empress. To me, empress quality is really the queen quality. It's, the mother quality, but priestess quality has a magical component to it. And I really believe that the combined energy of Mercury and Venus as morning star are priestess energy. And this is when she gets into magic, into plants, into herb crafting, and so on. And mercurial, all mercurial things become connected with her Venusian ways, and it's very magical. And so that is happening as well in the retrograde phase. There'll be a conjunction with Venus and Mercury, and so we're going to get into that energy and really explore what's available in the unconscious for us there. Now, one of the things about Mercury is it lines up here with the beaded necklace, and the beaded necklace does remind me of the rosary, the beads, the rosary and the mala. There's many different versions of beads, and so we will be connecting with that energy as well. And that is a very deeply meditative energy that we will get into. Now, I want to talk about the model that I will be using, because I am going to be using the Tychonic, the Tychos model, which is the updated Tychonic model. It's the completed Tychonic model, Tycho Brahe, in the Middle Ages, where Henry Lincoln was talking about the sun, the planets going around the sun. Well, it's so clear that they actually do, and as I've learned the astronomy of the Tychos model, which is the completed Tychonic model, It's completed because it gives Earth also a orbit, and that's kind of another topic, but it does give us the ages. So here I've just shown the Tychonic model in the middle, which is the model I will be using. The Copernican model, which is here on the left, which is what we're currently in, but I believe that will be phased out fairly soon because it doesn't actually make any sense. And the Ptolemaic model, which is the old model where the Earth was at the center and everything moved around it, is on the upper right here. So we've moved past that. But the very interesting thing is, and I talked initially about science and spirituality coming together, and there is somebody who predicted that. So Rudolf Steiner said, if one wants to have a significant helper for what one is to research for the future of the 20th century, someone, so to speak, who can advise one with regard to the supersensible world, if one needs impulses that are there, then it is the individuality of Julian Apostata Tycho de Brahe. And Julian Apostata is Tycho de Brahe in a previous life. So when he was seeing things, he would see people's lifetimes. So both of them are his different lifetimes. It is not on the physical plan today, but is actually always there and always gives information about those things related, namely to the prophetic in relation to the 20th century. So he really felt that Tycho Brahe was the one who was going to bring things into the new age. And the reason why is because of this. This is actually Rudolf Steiner's drawing. He said that during the Copernican age, we really disconnected from spirituality, and the medieval people that Henry Lincoln were talking about purposely, he says they purposely did this, switched the planets Mercury and Venus so that we wouldn't have access to their information and to their spiritual path. And so this is what happened with the Copernicus system. And so he drew this drawing because he said in the future we'll have a different system where it's beyond the Ptolemaic system where the Earth is just sitting in the center and not doing anything and everything is revolving around it. But there will be kind of this two-pronged process, and this is how he drew it. And really that is what has come about in my research and in my putting together this program. So here it is, the Tychos model. I've just sort of put it upright so that you can see. And the really interesting thing is that, so in the Tychos model, Mars and Venus are in overlapping orbits. It perfectly explains Mars's orbit because Mars has been this very strange, actually the Mesopotamians called it the strange one or the false star. And I can't remember who, another culture called it the hopping planet because it would do this weird hopping thing. And what Simon figured out and what Tycho Brahe figured out is that it happens because the Sun and Mars are in overlapping orbits. And today we would say that that is a binary star system. So that's what is the yellow is the Sun's orbit, the red is the Mars's orbit, and then you can see Earth down further here has its own orbit as well, which is a very, very slow orbit that is 25,433 years, which is the great year, basically. So when we lay it out and we see this model, we can now see the order of the planets. We see, here's Earth. We go to the moon, go Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and that's the theme of Monday. So Cancer, Leo, which would be the sun, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn. So this is the order that Venus is going into the underworld. Now, when you look at this model, up is down and down is up. Actually, what's closer to the Earth is daytime. What's further away from the Earth is nighttime. And so then to complete that whole thing, Saturn goes broop, all the way down here, and a kind of a circle or a cycle, and it goes Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, Taurus, Gemini. So that's the completion of the zodiac. And you notice that it's a straight line, and this connects us, I believe, to the Milky Way, which is the straight line with various gates that help us to ascend, basically. More about that in the actual workshop that we will be doing. All right. Speaking of the workshop, we want to come out of this whole Venus retrograde cycle illuminated. So as I mentioned, we're going to go into the moon gate. We're going to go into the Mercury gate. In the moon gate, we're going to find emotional resonance. In the Mercury gate, we're going to find harmonic resonance. And that is connected to actual things, as I mentioned, that occur in as I learned from the Tychos model. And we're going to do the Venus-Sun conjunction as the Venus gate when Venus and the Sun are cazimi, and there's very incredible power there we're going to work with. So just in terms of the moon and emotional resonance, there is a resonance that is actually there throughout all of the planets. And I'm just showing you the inner planets here, but it's through all of the planets. And this is maybe if you are an astrologer or an astronomer and you look at these dates, you're going to say, no, that's not what the days are. But what Simon Shack has done is actually gone and counted the days to verify, because what ends up happening is we repeat things and we take other people's numbers, and then false information kind of gets repeated. And so these are the actual numbers from actually counting the days. And so the moon has a 29.22 day cycle, and that resonates with Mercury. Mercury is 4 times that at 116.88, and Venus is 20 times that at 584.4 days, and Mars is 25 times that at 730.5 days, and the Sun takes, it's 12.5, so 12.5 times 29.22 is 365 days. So there's this resonance that exists, and we're going to start with the moon and connect with that resonance in the workshop that I will be doing. Now, I also talked about Mercury and Venus, and there's a number 40 that is very important. Venus goes retrograde for approximately 40 days, plus or minus, but the average is 40 days. And so in the esoteric and biblical and so on, you will hear 40 days, and that's always with reference to Venus. But every 40 years, Mercury and Venus conjunct in the same sign in the same degree. And Mercury has a very strange orbit, like Mars, but it finds this 40-year cycle. And so there's also a longer cycle where Venus will be and Mercury will be in conjunction in the morning together for 40 years. And so there's this very strange cycle with Mercury that connects with Venus and the number 40. So 40 is a very important number for Mercury and Venus. But there is also a harmonic pattern that exists through all of the planets, and this is a conceptual model that Simon put together, Simon Jack, and this is the 16-year pattern. And this is very important in terms of harmonics, because there is a harmonic, a 16-note harmonic, which they believe was connected originally to the Tartarians and to the Atlanteans. And so this is, I believe, Atlantean technology. We have a 12 note harmonic musical scale that we use, 12, but there's a 16 one that I will go into and explain. And this is I didn't develop it. This is from a book that I read that I will share in the actual course. But there's a harmonic pattern there. And when we get into the harmonics, we're getting into energy and vibration, and alignment with that is very magical. So that is the end of this masterclass on the navigating into the heart, the Venus retrograde in Aries coming up. Before I end, I just want to talk about actually what will happen with Venus in retrograde in Aries, because Aries is a particular energy, and it will also retrograde into Pisces for a time. So, like I said, when Venus is in the underworld, she is tested. And with Venus in the underworld in the sign of Aries and then Pisces, first in Aries, Aries is associated with war. And a wise energy connected to war would be Athena, the mythological character. Athena was very strategic. She was strategic war. So she used wisdom when it came to fighting. And so this would be a masterful way of using the Venusian energy in a warlike Aries quality. And when we are talking about a more unconscious energy, maybe you would think about Eris. And Eris was the one who threw the apple. She wasn't invited to the wedding. She came anyway, and she had an apple. She threw the apple, and she said to the fairest. So this one apple, the host of the wedding groom, I believe, had to decide who was the fairest out of Athena and Aphrodite and a third one, I can't remember the name. And so what ended up happening was she caused a kerfuffle, and she ended up causing war. So Eris was the goddess of discord and strife, and she played a very crucial role in the Trojan War. And that was a war that lasted a very long time. And so she's an energy that stirs things up. So, but Aries is also connected to courage, to pioneering, to, self-identification. Who are we? Who am I? So that is the Aries kind of energy that we will be dealing with in the retrograde. And so we can be tested. Who are you really? Like, what do you really stand for? Do you have a backbone? That can be tested. And then Venus will go back into Pisces. And Pisces is a very different energy. And in Pisces, Venus can be somewhat flighty. Her feet don't touch the ground. And her tests are more about tests of faith in relationships. It can be around boundaries, codependency, and issues like that. So those are the Arian and the Piscean energies that we will be dealing with. Like I said, if you're attracted to this talk, then likely you're feeling this. It's probably touching some of your planets in your personal planets. It's bringing up issues in your life, or you can feel that something might be coming up. And so, as I mentioned, I will be doing a workshop where there's a series of 3 workshops through those 3 gates, through the Moon Gate, the Mercury Gate, and the Venus Gate. And we will be doing practices and intention setting and creating a container for moving through the unconscious or the underworld. And the goal will be to come out of the other side illuminated. And so at this time, I want to invite you to join me on that in those workshops. It will be happening via Zoom, and I will put a link to it here in the show notes. If you really want to get into the spiritual path and the esoteric path, and really come out with deep spiritual growth, this is definitely the workshop for you. And I hope to see you there. Okay, take care.